Really pleased to have Mike Daniels here with us today. My name is Andy Bair. I'm a partner at Sway Ventures. Mike is a longtime friend and colleague. We've worked together over the years. We wanted to talk about today in our kind of fireside chat format some really interesting issues, which I think have been already previewed here a bit this morning, but even more so during the course of this morning. And that is really where we've come over, a good period of time, which we heard Steve and Guggenheimer talk about a bit and others as well. But Mike is really, I think, seminal in what we've done here in the last, let's say, 25, 30 years with founding of the internet and the foundation infrastructure that currently exists. Mike came out of SAIC, and that's when we worked together many years ago, but has done quite a lot since then. And I have a list I wanted just to go through real quick, which really is pretty amazing given his background and his accomplishments. Mike has been chairman and CEO of Network Solutions. He's been chairman of GlobalLogic, Mobile 365, Mercury Systems, and Invincea. He's been chairman of the Logistics Management Institute in Washington, D.C. He's been a board member of VeriSign, Sybase, Telcordia, and Apogen Technologies, and currently serves on the board of Blackberry, CACI, Internet on the net systems. He also served with DARPA and is a senior advisor at the White House for on the National Security Council for Technology Policy and former chairman of Northern Virginia Technology Council and the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, which is a pretty impressive record. And so what we'd like to do today, Mike, if you're willing, give us some of your insights, some of your experiences, and some of your thoughts on where we might be going with things with kind of the new age of technology here. But first, before I get to that, just one more point, and that is that with Mike having been the chairman and CEO of Network Solutions, I'm sure a lot of you know where Network Solutions came from and what it's done. Back in the early 90s, when SAIC bought Network Solutions and turned it into what it is today, it was really a very small company. I think there were, 14,000 IP addresses that Network Solutions had. And between now and, or then in the last, let's say, 25, 30 years, they've done quite a lot and have created more than, I think, 5 billion or almost 6 billion IP addresses and domain name service entries. And that's all cataloged here in the bestseller called Names, Names, Numbers, Network Solutions, written by Mike and Bob Beister with a preface from Vince Cerf. Bob was the former, is a founder and CEO of SAIC. But before we get to the founding of SAIC and Network Solutions, Mike, why don't you, if you could, give us a little bit of insight from your standpoint about where you think we're going with all that we see now today, major trends, where you think people should be investing and what we should be doing.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Andy, and thanks to Sway Minds. I looked at the slogan of the conference, and it was like, great ideas, sway great minds, et cetera, whatever it was, right? And I thought, well, great ideas create hundreds of billions of dollars of shareholder value. That's the way I read this. And I would say, Andy, and answer your question, that I've focused on 3 large trends. I am a trend guy in the technology industry. I've been in this industry for 45 years. I've been on the boards of 23 companies, ran a whole bunch of them. I'm a builder of companies, and now I'm a person who helps people build these companies. And I've been an investor in every single one of those companies. So what I would say is, as I've listened to the presentations this morning, I would say this to you. I've focused on 3 trends, but if you're not locked in on big tech trends that go on for many, many years, I would think hard about doing that. So I focused on the internet. And I started focusing on the internet, strangely enough, in 1969. The advance of that was when I went to Washington, D.C. I was assigned to something called ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. It wasn't even DARPA in those days. For those of you who don't know that agency, and it was mentioned earlier, that is the agency that has created more technology that has found its way into hundreds of billions of dollars of commercial territory than any single government agency in history. Has some of the smartest minds around it, and what they do well is contract out to the smartest minds. So out of DARPA has come the internet, which was the ARPANET, stealth technology, GPS technology, video teleconferencing, on and on and on. Those things found their way by us in the private sector, taking those technologies and commercializing them and putting them out there. I've lived through that journey. I've seen it time and again. I'm a big believer in DARPA. I build companies around DARPA, one that I'm chairman of right now in Washington, 26 Labs, DARPA contractor that then goes into the intelligence community, builds very advanced technology that is put into the field to help protect this country in 1,000 ways. So number one, I've been in and around companies and built them around the evolution of the internet. The internet was first dreamed up and funded in 1962 by a good friend of mine named Steve CACI, who was a director of DARPA in those days. Vince Cerf and Bob Kahn, the fathers of the internet, and I worked together at DARPA. So, you know, you watch the evolution of this, and what we talked about in earlier presentations, I'm always interested in where we've come, is we were doing research projects 20 years ago on AI, artificial intelligence. How do you apply that to major complex problems in the United States government, the Department of Defense, et cetera, et cetera. Here we are today, 25 years later. These things take a long time. So it took from 1969, when the ARPANET switch was turned on, for us to start using it, and we used it to communicate basically rudimentary email with our government contractors out of DARPA to what it's become today. So fast forward this, the second trend I've focused on for probably the last 25 years has been mobility, because we knew mobility was going to be laid on top of this internet and communications infrastructure worldwide. As people started to get small devices into their hands, this would change the world. So I've invested, we've built mobile communications companies. The third thing, my experience when I bought Network Solutions, and Andy referred to that, the United States government put out a competitive procurement out of the National Science Foundation in 1992 that anyone in this country who was a U.S.-based company could, and you better, there were only 6 bidders. So that tells you a lot. You better be paying attention to things, and you better focus on things that you think are big trends. When that was put out, that was a cooperative agreement. It's different from a contract that the United States government puts out. But a small company in Northern Virginia named Network Solutions bid on that contract. And what they won from the United States government was a 5-year exclusive agreement to manage and run .com and sell .com, .org, .net to the entire world, to manage .gov for the United States government, .mil for the United States military, and all country codes in the world. Okay? I bought that company in 1995. The end of that story is my friends on Wall Street still today say that that was the most significant, greatest investment in terms of return from the acquisition price to the sale in a 5-year period. So I bought that company in 1995 for $4.7 million. And we sold it finally to VeriSign at the height of the dot-com boom here in the Valley in 2000 for $19.3 billion. We also raised in that period in an IPO and 2 offerings, they were at that time the 2 largest internet offerings of all time, $779 million in 99, and then in 2000, $2.3 billion. So in addition, we raised $3.2 billion in the public markets. You wanted to be a holder of Network Solutions stock. We went out at 17. It ended up at $409 a share in a 5-year period, in a 3-year period from 97 to 2000. These are the kind of things that can happen if you're on the waves and you watch them for years and you follow it and your laser beam strategy on putting the right team in place and execution. So as Andy said, What I learned there were two things. You better be doing that. You better be watching these things in long-term trends, and you better be buying in at the right time. And number two is we were the single most attacked company on earth from 1996 to 2000. So I learned early on, think about that, that's been 20, 25 years ago, that this issue of security around what we're doing is vital. Because if somebody hacked in to network solutions, the entire internet worldwide went offline. We had that happen one time, and it was our mistake. One of our technicians loaded a null file at midnight, and the next morning, Europe woke up, no internet. Okay, so it was offline for 4 hours, okay? You can imagine the press. We were in the press every day on the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post. How did these guys get this contract? Who are they? Blah, 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 blah. So fast forward to privacy and security in the technology industry faces today. These have been brewing in Washington in the political circles for 25 years. What you should always remember is if you've lived in Washington and you've testified before Congress and it's a show, they're not interested in the facts. They haven't been interested for 25 years. You may think this is different. It's not. Why are you doing this? How'd you get this contract? What kind of stuff are you building? Blah, 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 blah. This is nothing new. It's just more intense now because of the pervasiveness and ubiquity of these kind of things. So the third thing I've focused on for years is security. We called it information security. Now it's cybersecurity. Those are the three big long-term trends I've locked in on and spent most of my time in all these companies. We built and invested in about 15, 20 of these companies. They become multi-billion-dollar defense contractors. I work that world. They become multi-billion-dollar technology, global tech companies, completely commercial. So that's what we do. And I do that with VC firms and private equity firms and roll-ups. So we've created probably over $60, $70 billion doing that with these companies over time. And the companies I'm on the board now, we're doing the same thing exactly. We're building these into new technology areas, advanced technology, putting them into the commercial global system, are putting them into the United States government. So those are the kind of trends. And, I think, Andy, you better lock in on these big trends. I say AI, yeah, it's interesting to me. It's going to be a big deal. But, we are at what the earlier speakers said. We've been working this 20 years. The United States government's probably spent 10, 20, 30 billion dollars on AI stuff, machine learning, how do you read this? How do you interpret patterns? And an enormous amount of that has been incorporated into our current systems. So, if you think you got a problem with data and how people use it, when I served at the National Security Council for 4 years, we were the guys who built the Crisis Management Center in the Executive Office building next door to the West Wing, which has a sit room in the basement. And what the problem was in the Vietnam War in the late 60s and 70s was we had so much information coming into Washington to the Pentagon, you couldn't get the right stuff to the right people to make a decision. When we were at the White House in the 80s, the problem was we had more information come in, and how do you get the right information to the right people, including the President of the United States and the National Security Council? We built a crisis management center, put every kind of exotic technology tool in, and the most interesting thing to me is the one thing we decided to do was put secure video conferencing in. So if all of you remember the classic scene of President Obama, Secretary Clinton, sitting in reason for the secure video conferencing, that was what we put in that facility in 1984. And the reason for it was the President of the United States at that time, Ronald Reagan, wanted to see and talk to his chief cabinet officials in a time of domestic or international crises. So we put that in 16 agencies in the United States government so you could do these things, okay? But think about that. DARPA funded the first money and research for video teleconferencing in 1973. We put that in the White House in 1984. Now we're hanging stuff on the internet in 2019. Right? These things take years and years and years to develop. So, Andy, that's kind of a big time summary, I guess, of an overall. You got to watch these things. You got to have people who know about them. Most people didn't know what a domain name was. They didn't care. There were 14,000 of them when we bought that company in 1995. You've got to watch these things evolve, and they take years and years and years in the technology industry. And for those of you who don't pay any attention to the United States government, that is a font of this kind of stuff that ultimately breeds $100 billion and more markets across the globe commercially. I've seen it time and time and time again. The only question in Washington today in the scientific technical community is, okay, we need it faster, quicker, cheaper. They put DIUX out here in the Valley. They put one in Austin. The breach between Silicon Valley, and I've sold 3 companies in the Valley, been on boards out here, currently on Blackberry's board, and the United States government and Washington and the users and the practical application of these technologies is still a gulf that has never married itself. It's hard to do. It's very difficult. The problems are different. The problems are different. When you're trying to give 20,000 troops in Afghanistan in the high mountains communication devices that will give them pinpoint accurate information about 1,000 things, including where the rest of their force is and where enemy forces are, it's a different problem. These are big enterprise scale problems. So, these are the kind of things we face right now.
Mike, that's really interesting. Thanks for that. You're right. It is a big time set of trends you focused on, and I think are really valuable for the group to think about. One question I have, and this goes back to kind of the title of our panel today, or fireside chat, and that is that we've entitled it Creating Billions and Through Monetization and Growth of the Internet, and that is connecting and creating. You've talked about how we've monetized that. Can you talk a little bit about the connections? And I want to come back to this number again, which I find just astounding, and that is when Mike got a hold and his team of network solutions, there were 14,000 connecting a lot of addresses, and now they're, I think somewhere between 5.5 and 6 billion. That's connecting a lot of people. And now we have a lot of companies, social media companies particularly, like Facebook and of course Microsoft, LinkedIn, et cetera, that connect billions of people around the globe. You've talked about privacy, you've talked about cybersecurity, et cetera. Can you talk a little about how you think about what happens now when we connect all these people, particularly as we think about putting the internet in space, which will have global coverage, and we get, let's call it 5, 6, 7 billion people connected, literally the entire planet or close to it. How do you think that's going to affect things?
I'm an investor, just like most of you in this room. I worry about the practicality of where we put our money and how we grow it to hundreds of billions of dollars in value, okay? So that's the way I think about these problems, Andy. I'm not a theoretical tactical, I'm a tactical guy. Let's get the strategy, find the right team, perfect implementation, you're on your way. If it's a huge market and it's going to go on for 25 years, even if you're 15th in it, guys who were 15th in the internet have made billions of dollars, right? So, I would say that it's one of the great opportunities of all time. We've got 3-4 billion people connected right now. We're going to get 6, 7, 8 billion connected. So this is going to vary by geographic region. It's going to vary, as somebody said earlier. Yeah, what sells in China is different from the United States versus the European community. People are going to have different policies, regulations, or different kind of places. So things can be adapted to all these different geographies. You can have one big central overlay. But I would say we're at a place where, this connectivity as it continues to grow creates unbelievable opportunity for everybody in this room. And a BlackBerry, let's take BlackBerry as an example, right? I mean, I went on the board of BlackBerry because when we built a company in Washington called Mobile 365, we had technical guys who brought European SMS and MMS to the United States. That was a company who pioneered that. We started doing business with Disney. We would handle the largest campaigns on text, messaging, Pirates of the Caribbean. We were the guys at McDonald's. You used to go into McDonald's and scratch off, I get a free cheeseburger. We digitized all that. You put a code in, right? So this is what we were doing. That company was bought by Sybase here in Silicon Valley. I went on the board, and that company we sold to SAP for about $6 billion, right? John Chen, who was a CEO, been here for a long time. Many of you probably know John. He was a CEO of Sybase. He ultimately took the job to try to turn BlackBerry around. Why did I give you that example? I went on that because John and I worked together through the Sybase years. That company was dead in the water, as all of you know. Every one of us probably in this room, or most of us, used to all carry a BlackBerry handset. All gone. BlackBerry no longer manufactures those. excuse me, we license those to 4 or 5 manufacturers around the world. We're not in that business. That company has been completely morphed on the basis of we're going to have 7 or 8 billion people on this planet connected. Still got the biggest corporate secure mobile communications network that people trust on earth of any commercial vendor. It's in the banks, it's in governments, it's all over the place. Number 2, we bought 7 companies. We've spent $3 billion. When John went into that 5 years ago, the place was 6 to 8 months was going to go bankrupt. So we've got $2.5 billion in cash in the bank. It's been positive in its numbers for the last 14 quarters. It's morphed into a mobile security global player in autonomous vehicles because it has a company called QNX that is installed in more automobiles worldwide than any single vendor on earth. Okay, that is growing leaps and bounds. Number 2, we bought cybersecurity companies. We closed on Cylance last 30 days ago, $1.4 billion. We are building a structure to hopefully be a company that is the IoT company of the future. That's the place it's being positioned. Because we think in those vertical markets that Blackberry has not only the reputation, it's a different company, but as you connect these people, and I'm a believer in that, it's going to be the biggest mess any of us have ever seen. It's going to be the biggest mess we've ever seen. Unless we get the standards right, which is a dogfight day and night across the globe, unless we get the applications right, unless we get the software right, we already see that we are in a global cyber war. Anybody who doesn't believe that, you better come live in Washington for a while. Mike Rogers, a former head of NSA, said 4 or 5 years ago, the Chinese theft of American intellectual property has now reached about $1 trillion. It's the largest theft of anything and IP in the history of the world, okay? So, this is a massive problem. Nobody's solving that problem. Everybody's spending hundreds of billions of dollars from banks on Wall Street to companies all over the globe to try to protect themselves so they don't go out of business and their stock doesn't die by 90% the day they're breached. Nobody's solving this problem. This has got to change completely, or else everything we built on the internet and everything that connects to it is going to be a mess for all of the rest of our lifetimes. It is the core linchpin of why people are either going to trust or not trust us in the tech industry, governments who make the policy around this, and whether this stuff is protected.
For one,
Big deal, Andy.
it is a big deal. I think we have time for one question. Anyone has a question? Yes, sir.
So you look at the landscape and all the venture dollars that are going after security, and I agree with you, it's a train wreck. I mean, thank God I don't have that position to have to try to figure this out for the company. But enterprise, you got to think about the CIOs and the CTOs that are sitting in the decision maker's role and looking at all these companies. There's so much noise. How do you even get through it all? And so, right, that just elongates finding the right thing to get in place.
It's a great question. All of us who have gone to RSA for years and years and years, you walk around the floor of RSA, it gets worse every year. You got 2,000 cyber companies, from the big guys to the mids to the smalls. Nobody in their right mind can figure out who's got the best anything. Okay, so the answer to your question is twofold in my mind. We built 2 cyber companies in the last 5, 6 years, sold every one of them, because they've had great technology, ranked as leading in endpoint security, blah, blah, blah. Number one, from an investor standpoint, you can make a lot of money off this stuff if you got the right stuff. Okay, number 2 is what's going to happen is somebody's going to have to come up, and there are some potential players out there with different kinds of technology to solve these problems. It's going to take a long time. I'm not going to say it's going to be perfect, but there are going to be some people emerge because they see what we're dealing with, okay? And I would say finally, if you're an investor in that, and the money that's gone into cybersecurity is beyond belief, and a lot of these are bad companies with terrible technology. I just get you some really smart people who have been through this before and understand that landscape, because they know what companies are good and where the stuff doesn't work. That's all I'd say to you. It is a mess, and the people who are recognizing more every day it's a mess and they don't know what to do about it for the last 4 or 5 years have been the people in Washington, top levels of government. They know this is a mess. and they can't even protect their own systems, right? So, you know, nobody's got a solution, but there's enormous money to be made in this. If you're reputable and you're ethical and you invest in leading technology in any of the pieces of this puzzle of cybersecurity, you are going to make a lot of money for a long time, because this is a long way from being solved. I'm not even sure it'll be solved the rest of our lifetime. I hope it will.
Mike, thank you. We really appreciate it. Thanks for coming in. Enjoyed your time and your comments. Thanks very much.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Andy. Thanks.